Joining me now from Tel Aviv is journalist Inna Lazareva. Inna, thank you very much indeed for joining me. What can you tell us about the latest news from Tel Aviv today?
Well, today I spent the day in the center of Tel Aviv, in the heart, standing just outside the military headquarters. And outside of there, since Wednesday already last week, there is a man who set up a chair there, and he won't go home. The reason why he won't go home is because his wife and 3 children are missing and held hostage in Gaza. And since Wednesday, many other people have been joining him. Many other families of hostages held, also families of those who've been killed. And then you walk a bit further along, and there is another protest. And this time, this protest is about Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister. And many of those protesters are veterans of the 1973 war. This was Israel's most disastrous war until 7th of October. And they're saying, we've had enough. He's failed the country. He's failed us. We want him gone. We won't leave until Netanyahu leaves office. So the mood is very, very divided. At the same time, there are still barrages of rockets hitting southern Israel. Also, Jerusalem and Tel Aviv came under rocket fire today. People had to take shelter. I understand people in parliament in Jerusalem had to shelter in them away from the missiles. So, and we're also seeing the escalation of a situation in the north, which is another big fear that everyone is holding. There are anti-tank missiles being fired by Hezbollah against Israeli tanks. Yesterday, an Israeli man was killed, an Israeli civilian. The fire there is escalating as well. And this is the nightmare scenario that people are most worried about, that this will open up a second front and there'll be a much heavier barrage of missiles hitting all over Israel.
And as far as you're aware, what do you believe Netanyahu's strategy is? We've heard about the troops amassing on the border. We've heard of reservists being called back to serve in the army from all over the world. We've heard, of course, about Israel's right to defend itself. We've heard, of course, about the atrocities and the massacre of this unprovoked attack by terrorists. We've heard so much about it. We've seen footage that we'll never be able to unsee that's utterly horrifying. But we also hear about these million people all having to leave their homes and trek to a place they don't know, where they don't live, and being completely displaced. And what is the aim, do you think? What is supposed to be happening? If you were to describe and explain, what would you say?
It's so difficult to answer and make out, and many Israelis I've been talking to today are also completely at a loss. There are troops, as you said, amassing on the border with Gaza. There are the reserves that have been called up to the north of the country. There are 28 communities in the north on the border with Lebanon that have been evacuated. They haven't been able to go back home there, and everyone is waiting to see. And I guess some analysts I spoke to are saying that this may be perhaps an attempt at deterrence, a show of force, so that in the hope that Hezbollah will be deterred from opening up a second front. As for the ground invasion in Gaza, this is a very difficult decision because Iran and others have threatened to escalate and launch attacks should Israel go into Gaza. For Israel itself, there is no good option. If they're going to Gaza, it will be a mainly tunnel warfare because Hamas have dug miles and miles and miles of tunnels underground. This is where they're hiding, and this is where they've got most of their booby traps set up, explosives and so on. They're lying there in wait. So a ground invasion would be very costly in terms of numbers of soldiers potentially killed for Israel. At the same time, the airstrikes are very, very strong. And as you said, people of Gaza are suffering immensely. It's looking to become, as the UN said, an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. People can't... they don't have access to fuel, to food, to water. It's and just now we've had quite a bizarre thing on social media where the United Nations Relief and Works Agency tweeted that some fuel and medicine had been stolen by Hamas authorities, and then they deleted the tweet. And so no one really knows exactly what is going on because many people are very afraid, and many people are hiding from the rockets and missiles that are being fired at Gaza at the moment.
I mean, when you hear, for example, the British Prime Minister, for example, the American President say Israel has a right to defend itself, you know, the most Jews killed since the Holocaust in one day, in this way without warning. Now, this is not what Israel is attempting to inflict in Gaza. Israel is not attempting to kill citizens without warning, civilians, children, elderly people. That's not the aim. Israel says it's aiming to wipe out the terrorist organization Hamas, which isn't at all the same thing. And Israel has, of course, as we know, released millions, thousands, hundreds of thousands of leaflets telling the civilians of Gaza, please leave your homes, please get out of the way, we are going to do this, we don't want to kill you or hurt you, please leave. It's not the same thing. However, there is, of course, colossal suffering, people who can't easily move away. There are going to be people caught in the crossfire, no question about it. And there are feelings in Israel of terrible grief for your own people and terrible grief at the loss of life, of babies, of elderly people, and hostages. Nobody knows where they are. Nobody's had any word, but also of what's going to happen in Gaza, because there isn't a well of hatred in Israel for the citizens of Gaza, is there?
Not a well of hatred, but there is a sense of people are looking for revenge, to put it bluntly. Yeah, and also referring to what you were saying earlier, no, Israel does not target civilians intentionally, but remember that Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on earth. It's just 140 square miles, very, very narrow place, and everything's packed so tightly together. And of course, Hamas infrastructure is very often underneath civilian facilities, sometimes schools, sometimes other places. The vast network.
Can we just unpick that just a little bit, Inna? So some people will be thinking this enormous network of tunnels built by Hamas terrorists in Gaza, why don't they take civilians down into the tunnels to keep them safe? If there's a bombardment overhead from Israel, why don't they take their own citizens into their own tunnels that they've carefully crafted to put in secret places so they can't be harmed and hurt? Why don't they? What's the answer to that?
I don't know, but those tunnels, Gaza, even before the war, before the full siege that has just been imposed on Gaza, Gaza's been living with constant power cuts for years and years. Part of this is a result of the partial siege that imposed by Israel and Egypt, and part of it is because Hamas is deploying resources to light up those tunnels underneath for its military purposes and depriving the population of things like that. And this goes across to everything else that's happening in Gaza. The people are suffering, yes, because of the siege that Israel and Egypt have imposed, but also of Hamas's choices in the way that they're deferring resources to warfare rather than to their own populations. This is something that's been going on for years.
So some people might be confused if they're not familiar with the area, they don't follow what's going on very closely, and people don't. They live their own lives, they lead their own lives. Occasionally they're aware of something in the Middle East, they don't think about it very much. They just carry on, and quite rightly so. Why shouldn't they, in a way? But when they hear Hamas and then they hear Hezbollah, what is the difference between the two, if you could explain it to people who aren't necessarily abreast of what's going on?
Well, just to break it down in very basic terms, Hamas is derived from the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, and in their charter, their aim is not specifically a Palestinian independent Palestinian state, but they want to build an Islamic caliphate. They reject all notions of Israel. They state that they want to kill Jews. Hezbollah is a militia mainly in control of most of southern Lebanon. It is funded by Iran, and over the years has been building up a huge arsenal of weapons, pointing at Israel. And right now, they're waiting essentially instructions from Iran whether to fire all that huge arsenal of weapons at Israel. Now, the consideration there is Lebanon is in a terrible economic situation as it is, and any kind of war, getting drawn into war with Israel, would just prove also disastrous. I feel like there's disaster everywhere in this region right now. But this is a calculation. Those are the main differences.
Have you ever experienced a fear and an unease and an apprehension as you're experiencing now? Because it's quite clear from the expression on your face, although you're doing a fantastic job of giving a very, very professional report indeed, that you're feeling many emotions. I can see it in your eyes, I can see it in your face, and quite rightly you should be. But have you ever experienced anything like this level of fear and apprehension?
I've been covering wars here on and off since 2012, and no, it's this is by far the most frightening and the most devastating war. In particular, seeing the victims, the videos of children, not only those hostage, those are being killed, those now suffering in Gaza. It's very devastating for many people, and I think people on both sides, Israelis and Palestinians, are completely traumatized by this, and through this trauma, people become more radical and. Yeah, they are looking for revenge.